with a capital I.
All right, now it's live.
Now we're live. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just do a quick intro again.
Reset with a capital I.
Oh, good. Hi, everybody. My name is Ahmed Nasri. I'm the Chief Architect at TELUS. TELUS is a Canadian telecom. I'm representing the Enterprise User Feedback Group as part of the User Feedback Committee of Node.js. And before we get started talking about some of the agenda topics today, perhaps a quick roundtable introduction around the attendees, just to get everybody's kind of current enterprise relation / company they're representing. So I think I'm just going to go by the list of names I'm seeing in the Zoom chat. So Mihai, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. My name is Mihai Nepietresanu. I'm with the PMI Portland Chapter Institute, project manager, mostly in software. And right now I'm part of Node User Feedback. Kind of 1 year ago, I joined the Node.js Foundation in software.
Excellent, thank you. Aaron, do you want to go next? Okay, Aaron's probably still getting his cable. Daichen?
Hi, my name is Dongyun Chen. I work for Intel. I kind of manage a team inside Intel working on Node.js workload use case optimization for server data center. The topic today is pretty interesting to me, although we don't really use a lot of Node.js inside Intel, but we are pretty interested in how it's being used and all the which part is being used heavily or kind of need more improvement. So that's why I'm here. Thanks.
Dan, you want to do a quick intro?
Yeah, you bet. Actually, let me hand it to Aaron first. We're in the same room, so we're battling muting mics. But let me hand it over to Aaron.
Oh, we're not hearing Aaron.
Thanks.
Oh, none of that was coming through?
Nope.
Oh, that was unmuted again. All right.
Okay, we can hear you.
I think we can hear him through, yeah.
Through my mic, right?
All right. Hey, Aaron here from PayPal. Yeah, happy to be here. I was at a previous meeting, I don't know, a few months back. I'm glad to be part of this. So thanks for inviting me.
Welcome. Thank you. Michael?
I'm Michael Dawson. I'm from IBM, acting as the community lead, as well as a member of the project in terms of like the technical steering committee and a number of the different working groups. And now I can't hear you, Ahmad. Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. All right, Retro Hacker.
Hi, I'm Will. I'm with Netflix. We're working on building a Node.js platform to serve the device teams of the company.
Cool. And Joe?
Hey all, Joe Seppi here. I have too many meetings and not enough food, so I'm driving to go get some lunch. So I'll manage my mute appropriately. But I work at IBM. I am an open source engineer and developer advocate. I've been on the community committee for a while and started doing some stuff with user feedback here. Actually, I still need to start doing some stuff. I got a couple of surveys to start that I hope to get going today. And generally, I'm interested in the enterprise focus of this group.
Excellent. I'll send you my lunch order. You can pick it up on the way.
You got it.
So let me just do a quick kind of reset again for people watching us on the internet. I'm going to try to share my screen real quick, if I can. There we go.
And I'm Disha. Well, Ahmed's doing it.
Oh yeah, Dan.
User feedback's my. I'm the champion of user feedback and the user feedback initiative, and I am global head of developer relations at PayPal, and dragging PayPal team kicking and screaming into this.
Cool. Aaron didn't seem to be kicking or screaming, but anyway.
It's totally not kicking or screaming.
So just a quick context setting. We talked about, last time we kicked this meeting off, we talked about how do we better engage with different representatives from enterprise companies building large scale, multi-million-dollar projects on top of Node.js, and bringing the context of business operations and the value of businesses investing in Node.js back to the Node.js project, so that we can surface data points, we can surface needs, we can surface a feedback cycle that benefits not just the businesses and the Node.js project itself, but the entire community of Node.js users and developers around the world. And obviously, then with a different lens on it than the kind of public feedback groups and the public feedback kind of insight that we get from the general public, just looking at the lens of a business and the lens of a dollar sign investment in front of it, of how does that affect, how does something as simple as an API change might affect a business operation or values that the businesses are trying to achieve. So for today's meeting, we wanted to have a little bit of a focus around a few topics, mainly, like I mentioned, data and insights usage within large teams, and how can that insight be shared back with the Node.js project in a meaningful way that provide actionable insights. How can businesses contribute back to the project in anything other than volunteering individual time or and specifically non-monetary type of contribution back to the project? So whether that be in data reporting, anonymized insights, or structured call to actions around certain things that the Node.js project is trying to achieve, like say hypothetically a new version comes up, and we want to make sure that on top of all the testing that the project is already invested in, we want to see, is this a new version or a change in the performance? Does it impact businesses and companies in a significant way, either positively or negatively? Both things are valuable learnings. And then any other means, as long as it's a structured approach that can be adopted by large scale teams as opposed to individuals, because we all know that your time is precious and valuable, and we all know that you're volunteering your time just to be on this call to begin with. So any sort of approach to asking feedback or gathering data needs to be in a structured way that makes it easier for you to execute. So just in terms of today's topics, I think the first topic I want to ask is, in the context of data and the context of insights, what can teams, given your knowledge of your company and your operations, what type of data can your team safely provide externally to an open source organization such as the Node.js Foundation under the Linux Foundation, without having to go through the complexities of legal agreements or anything like that? And let me just start by giving some example based on the type of user feedback conversations that we've had, at least in the past couple of months. When we look at things like API changes in the core, when we look at things like package maintenance topics that are happening right now, there's a lot of information lacking from what happens behind private repositories and private projects, which I think by an estimate I read a long time ago represents at least 70 to 80% of the developer ecosystem, as opposed to what's available through open source packages on NPM or in GitHub. So that means we're missing a significant amount of data, which leads to a significant amount of misalignment potentially on making decisions, whether it's technical decisions to the core of Node.js or to the ecosystem around it. So again, as an example, if our company is able to report back on something as simple as how many times is the promised API used in your code bases? Is that something that companies are able to scan, freely scan at least, through their repositories and send back anonymized data around that to the Node.js Foundation? And that's not a specific ask, but that's an example of a type of an ask that if the core technical group is trying to make a decision about an API deprecation or trying to make a decision about a performance impacting change, how do they gather that information? Are we able to ask enterprise representatives to run some analysis of their code bases and bring it back if that analysis is provided as a structured tool that you can just run in your infrastructure.
Hey, this is
some echo there. Who was it that was speaking? We're not hearing any audio. Maybe it's Aaron.
Sorry.
Still not hearing audio.
Maybe when you all need to drop from the call.
Let me just.
Right here, you can mute it.
Right, but I'm on mute.
All right.
That's enough.
All right,
You're not on mute.
All right, hey, this is Aaron over here at PayPal. That's something we could certainly do. We don't capture, we don't do an analysis of API, Node.js API usage today, but pretty much every app that's in production certainly goes through our build pipeline, and there are opportunities for us to capture that metric. We could do that. That's not impossible. It's a pretty good idea.
Do you foresee legal questions that might arise from running scanners and sharing data out of scanners, if such a scanner exists?
Yes. I mean, I don't know why, right? These are public APIs, but I'm sure somebody cares. So we'd have to track down who that is and jump through a hoop there.
What would be the requirement for you to easily do that and share that back? Say, hypothetically again, because I don't have anything on mind right now, nor does the tool exist, but say a tool does exist, and say, hey, can you run this tool and tell us PayPal provides X, Y, and Z in terms of some internal API usage or some internal core library? Do you just need a tool to run? Would you then figure it out on your own, do the extra effort on your end? What would be...
If there was a tool to run, that would be really easy to drop in. Otherwise, we'd have to write something.
I think the tool would help in getting you a standard answer too.
Right.
I assume though that the model would be like, here's a tool which you can probably look at fairly easily to understand it's just scanning for something. And then you would not have the tool report the data back. It would be like, it would have the answer that says, okay, how often are promises used in your code base? It would be like, we found 8,000 occurrences of promises being used, and that would be something you could probably more easily get legal approval for.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple approaches. One is during our build times, so then we would aggregate this data over time and share it back or something, producing a report, make sure that legal's okay with it. Another approach would be, scanning all of our production repositories, at a big one-off, and make our repository hosting team sad because we would blast the APIs with a ton of calls. But maybe that's not a good way to do it, but that's another approach. My instincts say for us probably capturing it on an ongoing basis and storing it in our existing metrics, works for us, but that might not be the best solution for everybody.
So I think a good question arises from that context is, how big is your footprint in those kind of code bases and repositories?
How big is our footprint?
Yes.
Well,
because to your point, you said if you're going to run it against repositories, there might be a challenge if you're talking about thousands.
Yeah, many hundreds. Oh, those are just apps, and that's not all.
Right. Yeah. Lots. Lots and lots.
I really like the ongoing, analysis at build time, because we're already doing analysis for other reasons. We wouldn't have a one-off, hey, we have a great, full result in a few days, because this would be an ongoing thing we would be capturing. But it's an easier thing for us to get into our existing workflow if we went that direction.
That's good feedback. Will, do you have anything to add there?
Yeah, I think the challenge for us would just be figuring out how to audit not just the services themselves, but our dependency trees. Most of our stuff is pushed down into the models or modules, and I can see that it'd be very hard to tell at build time which dependencies are actually being used on the execution path. But as long as the tool itself doesn't report out over the network and we have a file that we can audit before sharing, I would be very surprised if we saw any resistance. But I think for us, what we would need is for the tool to exist and have something in hand that I can bring to engineers who are working on these code bases and test their level of comfort. But does that make sense?
Yeah, I think Adam just joined and he had something to add there.
Hey, sorry, yeah, this is a really cool conversation. So I'm gonna talk with enterprise LinkedIn employee hat on here. Just comment on the legal aspect of it. There's a whole slew of apps and tooling and CLI tools that you opt in kind of automatically when you download them to report anonymized statistics on the run. I'd be very curious what the precedence is for those tools, like the language that they use in the terms of service to make these larger companies okay with doing it. I know that LinkedIn will probably have concerns about anything leaking out from behind our corporate network, but it already happens. So there's good precedent here for the reporting. So there's stuff that Node can probably do on its end to make enterprise users more comfortable from a legal standpoint, reporting these things. Partially like an audit and a guarantee that statistics are anonymized, it's secure. There's,
Actually, I think we weren't even talking about instrumenting the runtime, though. Mm-hmm. It was more of like, here's a tool to run, it'll give you the answer, and then you can manually report those results.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's the instrumenting, I think that's, a lot of organizations would have a hard time with that.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's fair.
I agree with that.
Yeah. In the same sense, so I guess that gives us enough of a good foundation of if there's a question around, and we've heard that question before about API usage, looking at tools to help us surface some numbers. And like, as Michael said, the reporting it's probably best to keep it manual, even if we can automate it, just so that it becomes a handover conversation as opposed to data is being collected. Dangerous words. But equally in a different sense, so like if we're looking at the dependencies, like, I know Will mentioned dependencies, but he was talking more about like the core APIs usage within the dependency. But what about the dependencies themselves? For example, we're all familiar with what happened earlier in the week with some of the vulnerabilities that surfaced.
Yeah, good times.
Interesting times. So we can easily look at, as a community, we can look at NPM and look at the dependents and say, okay, some bigger libraries are being affected. But that doesn't tell you immediately the actual level of impact for businesses. Specifically, if you're using that dependency directly or if your business operations are running on that dependency. In our case, we looked at it and it doesn't affect us. No. Good, great, success. But we still have a lot of work to do. We still have to upgrade a lot of our dependencies. We still have to clean up a lot of our technical debt around that stuff. So in terms of package dependencies out there, you're not likely to get that information from NPM because you're not publishing every single thing to NPM. Your applications are likely living in GitHub, and only your libraries are potentially living in NPM, if not living in a private registry. Would that type of information be also something your company can share?
Yeah, once you get into that security incident area, that definitely gets a lot dicier. We may want to explore non-vulnerability considerations I think something like ES module adoption would be a happier path for us to, explore that sort of a framing.
Well, let me articulate that more. I wasn't suggesting that to share whether or not you're vulnerable. I was suggesting as, would you, let's say, I'm going to use PayPal because you guys spoke up first. Would PayPal say, here's the top list of packages that we use in PayPal? We're not saying where that's being used, but hey, we use requests, we use, something stream, we use left pad. And then the consequence of that being that, if one of those have a vulnerability, now you're, at least one step closer to knowing that PayPal has that dependency and maybe I can exploit it.
Right.
Without naming names or specific incidents, I am aware of one specific, that was a public incident, and it may or may not have been anything related to Node, but it was an open source project, and there was a lot of concern expressed internally from our leadership about we wouldn't want to be associated with anything related to something like that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I definitely hesitate when it comes to sharing anything too detailed about what we use, other than what we've already exposed or what we've decided to say, yeah, we use Express, because of Kraken and stuff. But I'm just cautious there because I could see the hammer coming down the wrong way, actually, internally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and actually reporting any type of public reporting of what packages you use internally opens you up to more targeted attacks potentially.
Exactly.
So there would be concern there.
Yeah, so the reason for that ask is exactly what William said, because a lot of time, a lot of your usage of a certain API might actually be in dependencies or hidden away in a tree of dependencies.
Right.
But then the other lens to this is there's now a working group proposal I think Michael was leading in the context of how can the foundation support the package maintainers and actually get some value to the community through that. And the very first question that probably came up is, well, where do you start? What's the priority?
Right.
You can look at NPM dependencies, you can look at the numbers of downloads, but that's not exactly an indicator. In our case, all of our downloads are cached, so we're probably registering one download hit on NPM for any particular library that we're using, or any particular version of any library we're using, and that's it.
Mm.
So how do you quantify value to the community beyond the open source numbers that we have? And that's where that ask for, can we even ask companies for what dependency?
Yeah, I mean, we might want to flip the script there and say, all right, here's the list of top NPM dependencies from NPM. Are these important to you? Like, if we were to prioritize our time and effort on a thing, is this short list the important list, and is there anything you want to add? That gets it out of this is our internals sort of discussion.
So providing a top list and asking the businesses to identify what would they be more interested in seeing or sent towards.
So the circumstance might be, here's 20 important modules we think are really critical to the ecosystem.
Yeah.
Do you care about this list? A company could safely say, yeah, we care about this list because Express is on it in our case, right? And we don't actually have to say if we're using 19 of the others or not. We need to say we care.
Yeah, you don't have to indicate why you care. You can just say, I agree that these are important.
Right.
Okay. I wanted, just on the context of libraries, I wanted to show and share something we're doing here. Again, just perhaps to collect feedback, but also to see whatever level of learnings we can share, at least, because we're doing a lot of those trackings internally. I'm just having a problem with my machine. Okay, there we go. So we actually track, can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. We actually track all of the, sorry, I'm getting the bar from Zoom in the way. Okay. We track all of our library usage, both external and internal. This is an example of internal libraries that we're using, which is specifically our design system. We track across all of the packages, across all of the applications, which package is being used where, and what version of each package is being used, just so that we ourselves, as the design system owners and maintainers, can make sure we're working with the application developers to say, hey, your application is a bit behind on version X, Y, and Z of this design system component. Or we can also say, what's the most used design system component there is? Well, in this case, it's core box. Similarly, we go into each, let me go into a detail. We kind of divide this by our teams as well. So we can even see, here's the version tracking number. We look at, because we also use automated bots for pull requests. We look at current version of each component and what version is each application on. And we just drill through it and track them. So we can see like there's some things that are lagging behind, some things that are way behind. So we can actually prioritize where we, as again, the package maintainers, can focus our investment on helping those applications get updated. So just, sometimes ugly diagrams, sometimes pretty diagrams. But the point is, like, we have that internal data of tracking stuff, not just for our own components, but for all the libraries that we're using. And then we track adoption across all the company of all the libraries and the components that we have. We use Data Studio for this, just to filter the data out, and we're doing all of this manually. This would be like very interesting to associate with a $sign, at least for a value kind of measurement. If I look at some of the type of work and type of applications that are being used for, like a lot of it might be marketing type applications or static websites, but there are applications in there that are directly in the path of the customer, in the path of sales, in the path of a checkout workflow that actually have dollar value to the business. So I can't show you any of that data, but it'd be interesting to say hypothetically that Express is a key component of us being able to do e-commerce, as an example. What version of Express is also relevant, and how it's being used is relevant. But at the very least, knowing that we have a dependency in that context makes it so that we, as a business or as a technology team, have a clear mandate to invest back in this tool, in whatever shape or form that may be. So like that was just a quick example of some of the data we have collected. But back to the point of the conversation, it's very hard to share that data to public libraries, given the context of vulnerabilities and given the context of now people can at least know an attack vector or a possible attack vector.
Right. Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, we have a lot of those same statistics, like you were just outlining in your pretty tool. We had a tool like that. We've recently, a few months ago, we shut it down for separate reasons. But what I wanted to point out was, when it comes to those tools like, the node security tool, the scanner thing, and there's npm audit now, and those require passing listed dependencies and versions back out to some other place, and like that's all shut down. Like we're not fans of that. Nobody should be doing that. Yep. So we have alternative approaches for security internally to prevent that. Just for more context.
We have a similar setup actually. So we have an internal tool very similar to what you just showed. Far less pretty, but I'd also be interested in the cost to enterprise companies to manage that type of tool themselves, because I know we have poured a lot of dev hours into getting that spun up and keeping that working. And you could make a case for providing a tool that does that type of dependency tracking across multiple repositories that you can point it at, n number of endpoints, get all the stats. And then potentially a feature could be opt-in anonymized reporting to a central source to help the ecosystem as a whole. So enterprise gets a tool that they don't have to pour money into managing. Node, you get to opt in to helping the community with anonymized reporting statistics for public packages. And have that be the vector into that type of statistics.
Yeah, I think absolutely. Like I think tools such as that, like you said, there's a cost of development teams, and there's a products that do the stuff anyways. Like, I don't think the expectation is that people should be building or using something like that, but the output of such a tool that you guys all said have similar things might have been useful in some context to share back to the community. And that's the question I'm asking, is like, what type of information can be shared? We talked about, potential analysis tools that can give you core API usage that helps the technical steering committee in understanding core decisions about the core elements of Node.js itself. We talked about libraries and dependencies, and publishing that sort of information is not as useful. What other type of information do you all use or track within your own development teams and practices that you might think might have some subset that can be shared? And I'm just showing the example that I have because those are the things we track. The only thing I found in our tracking that can be shared publicly is external dependencies and their versioning. But due to the reason we just discussed, that's a bit of a challenge. I don't have more data. I wish I did have more data, but that's why I'm asking for your large-scale enterprise teams. What other data do you collect? Perhaps there's commercial products that you use that have surfaced some value to you that have other data points that we can ask about as well.
So at least here, I wouldn't say we collect the data, but we're able to analyze it as needed. There's a lot of performance metrics that we track just on how things are running at any given point that might be able to, I don't know if it actually surface new information to Node, other than, hey, here's a hot function in core that is causing delays in this certain scenario. Again, not that you necessarily be able to securely share that in a nice way without specifically handing off data. But we do a bunch of perf tracking in that sense, which could be valuable.
I was going to ask about performance in the context of, and I mean, we have New Relic and we use Stackdriver for different things. One of the things I haven't done, I wish we have the time to do, or hopefully we're going to do in the future. We do track performance, but I want to track performance more on an abstract level. Like, say we upgrade from Node 10 to Node 11. I can look. I want to see the delta, right? All things being equal. Would that type of information be something easily shareable and valuable to the Node community? So, like you said, Adam, like there's some internal stuff nobody wants to share, but is that the right type of information that can be surfaced from the tools that you all use?
Maybe I can speak for pretty much every team here. Everyone cares about that. Updating to a new version of Node and seeing the CPU improvements and everybody cares. Product cares, management cares, engineers care.
So speaking for myself, we do care as well, but we're never been able to actually do that.
Right.
Sit down and try and compare A to B.
We don't have that as a solved problem.
Yeah, neither do we.
Michael, is that something that if we were to run the benchmark tests internally, that you feel like our benchmarks are at a point where we would be able to potentially glean some information?
You mean run within businesses, or we already run them nightly and show the comparison?
Like we were all to spin up a instance or instances of benchmarking.
I don't think that's like, that might bring out specifics about the hardware or like environment that you run things on. But it's probably more likely that there's things specific to your application that would be affected by the changes versus the underlying hardware, right? So the more useful thing might be to develop and provide benchmarks which reflect your internal applications, right? So if it's like, if you had a really simple application and it was like, okay, here's how you can set up and run that as a benchmark, then that's something that, maybe that we could run nightly and then feed that data back. If we basically had, here's, 5 different benchmarks that reflect different types of applications in real life businesses, then the data coming out of those would say, hey, is it getting better? Is it getting worse? And that would be a useful thing, right? So it's how you translate your actual real world apps to something that we can generate the data on, you know.
So we have, and they don't really quite count as benchmarks, although we do care about this as well. But we presumably, as well-established companies, have pretty robust test suites around all of our applications. If there was a way other than just like a way to get more valuable data other than just record start time, record end time, see the diff,
right?
Where we could get perf information on how our tests are performing between different versions, that there may be ways for the project to ease that type of testing.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we have a couple of benchmarks, but it's always the question of like, how closely do these relate to real life workloads?
Right.
And anything we can do to sort of get to the point where it's like, yeah, okay, we're pretty confident these few benchmarks, if they go down, then that means that you're really affecting businesses as well. That would be quite useful.
It would be interesting to get a group of people with a vested interest in Node.js performance committed to having one instance of some significant product spun up locally where they can report kind of fairly anonymous perf statistics and be running kind of pre-releases of latest Node to make sure that nothing is imploding in the process.
Right, that's sort of along the lines of like the early testing, early canary. If you can't make a benchmark that you can, act as a proxy, actually having data that says, yeah, we've run it and things only look better, or hey, wait a second, we've seen these things, and then maybe reproduce a test case. That's also very good.
The enterprise canary crew.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that touches on a topic we talked about in the user feedback session a while ago, where we've talked so far about how can enterprises provide data into the project, but let's switch gears and talk about how the project can help provide data back to the enterprise. And in this context, I would say, at what point to everybody here representing kind of the different enterprise companies that you're part of, at what point do you even look at the release candidates, if at all, and even think for yourself about performance impacts or any other kind of impacts, right? I'll speak for myself. I don't. It's not easy. Unless I'm doing it for myself as opposed to for my business or the business I represent. Is that something that the project, like Adam suggested, if there's something that the project can provide as a structure or as a mechanism of saying, even more clearer than, by the way, there's a release candidate somewhere, go download it from GitHub and run it. If there is such a structure, are people here confident in their own business ability to go and try that out? Like, do we even have that capacity within your teams? Speaking for my team, I'm trying to create that capacity that's not there today. Do you have that type of level of maturity of DevOps practices or similar that you can decide to spin off a isolated container somewhere, an isolated VM environment, and run tests on? In this context would be versions of Node. Or is that
it's really tricky. I think that's really tricky for us, just looking out across our ecosystem. Very many different use cases, different types of teams made up of different, personalities where they care about some things and other folks don't. Product people, sure, they like it if the bottom line is improved, great. How much do they want to invest in it? How do you quantify being, if they need to invest to be able to put this in place, well, how much of a cost is it? How, much work? And, there's just like security, like concerns, and everybody starts to, I don't know how it's going to fly. I mean, I love the idea. I just don't know how well, it's not striking me immediately that is a path forward. Like, I don't know how we would.
Yeah, this is sheer scale and diversity of the types of applications that we run and all on Node. Kind of makes where's the toehold, right? There's no singular, Node thing.
We have the test environments. We have the automation. Production is different. It's just flat out totally different. Would anybody want to run this in production? So then you get back into maybe not. What's their motivation?
The spirit is willing, the body is weak. Yeah.
I'm guessing it's because there haven't been any big enough disasters. You know, you haven't gone to upgrade and then, hey, it falls over to half the performance and it costs you a bunch of money, right? So it's been okay. Or I'm just guessing that's usually when it's sort of like, well, we think it's a great idea, but we can't justify it. It's often because it hasn't been enough pain to.
Yeah.
So speaking for myself, I think that ultimately comes down to dollar signs, right? At the end of the day, I want to do a whole bunch of things, but I have to justify them with the business and make the business cases for them. And just to kind of bring this home a bit more, let's say, again, this doesn't happen today, but say there's a enterprise canary group, like Adam called it, and that enterprise canary group receives, I just call it a monthly email from the project describing an upcoming release candidate. But within that project, within that kind of notification or alert saying, here is the actual numbers of the performance gains we will get if you upgrade from this version to this version. Does that trigger at least a dialogue internally of, oh, this is coming. This might give me 10% improvement overall, maybe 80% in some cases, like think crypto improvements or kind of HTTP improvements. Does that number or something along those lines help build an internal business case to further investment along the way? And maybe it's a one-off, and maybe it's sometimes you're going to say, yeah, I don't care. But other times, just having that knowledge helps you kind of build that business case over time. Because the challenge I have internally is I still have Node 6 running. And short of me having the authority and power and telling people, thou shall not use that anymore, people don't upgrade. And I'm not just talking about the latest version of Node 6. I'm talking about an earlier version of Node 6 with security vulnerability. So even with the security context in mind, it's hard to get people to actually press that button to make a new build. But if I have the business case for even something that's performance impacting, it becomes a little bit of more of there's an investment and there's a dollar sign associated with it, which drives action, at least in bigger companies, as I've noticed, more so than goodwill and want to do clean up technical debt.
So just out of curiosity, does anybody on the call have Node 10 released and data internally on cost savings or like the timeline? But no.
Yay, enterprise!
We can't even run Node 10 because it doesn't work on our platform. So,
that was our driving. That was our driving motivation for adopting Node 10, was to validate all the debugging tools would work for our use cases before it went LTS. So we had an opportunity to be a part of that conversation, and that worked out really well for us, I believe.
Awesome. Can we get a case study from you on how awesome that was so that we can use it as a selling point for everybody else?
I'll bring that back to the team.
Yeah, that's actually a great idea.
Cool.
You know, we came back, we worked with the community, and this is what we were able to achieve by being involved. Be a good story.
Yeah. So putting on LinkedIn enterprise hat, I think here we're finally getting to a point where I could make that case and help get the team moving in a direction. We'd be interested in being a part of that type of program if it existed. We would need the friction of doing this to be very low. So like here is a cut of the node binary that you run it will spit out a file on disk that we can just hand back. Like, and we literally just run our program or run our test suite with that instead. Like it needs to be that simple for us to really buy into to helping, at least in the early stage. So that's a way that the project could help grease the wheels on the enterprise front for getting some data back. But yeah, it will also help with data collection, like standardization would be nice there. But certainly if we hear other case studies, like the case can definitely be made on our end to help out a bit. I'd be interested in exploring that more.
So what quality of data is the project interested in? Is it mostly like the synthetic tests run against like maybe our infrastructure, or is it more along the lines of like what will the impact to actual production services be if we release this like theoretically today? I guess turning it back to y'all, what are you interested in from our end?
I would say anything and everything, obviously, but here's why. Just having you will come here and say, hey, Netflix has had a performance impact of 1% in our production level. I don't need to know where, I don't need to know why. That sets a type of a conversation and a dialogue internally that can surface itself in multiple different ways. It can surface itself to the performance team saying, oh, we need better benchmarks because maybe we missed that, because our benchmarks show that this was better, but Netflix ran it and it actually made them slower, right? It might surface itself in the kind of core API team and the way some of those APIs have evolved, and saying, well, wait, we're just doing non-production breaking changes or non-breaking changes in the APIs. How come performance is impacted? Like, there's no way to predict how it would surface, other than, and this is why we're having this dialogue of knowing that this is not just library maintainer X saying my performance dropped by Y. Okay. But knowing that this is actually affecting Netflix, even at 1%, even at 0.5%, that's a massive amount of traffic on the internet. And likewise for any sort of banking or telecom provider or any sort of other businesses relying on Node. And we don't need to talk about where that reliance is happening for privacy and security concerns, but just knowing that there's an impact there would help surface where the investments need to be within the project itself. Like I said, whether it's we need better performance, we need better benchmarks, we need better kind of investment in these tools, rather than just keeping shipping things and keeping making changes and dealing with the consequences after.
That makes sense. So I guess to repeat that back, it sounds like the most valuable kind of test we could run would be something along the lines of a 1% test, where we expose maybe even synthetic traffic against a node binary and see how it performs.
Yeah, I don't believe it needs to be in production to be meaningful.
Yeah, it just needs to be a delta.
Yeah, I honestly think that even, like I said, just running a test suite against a new node binary would give us valuable data. Like, maybe not, it wouldn't be like production data. There would be possibly differences, but the canary in the gold mine, we don't need it to be playing with the actual bird. So
one of the key things is this is a peer group, and the challenges that we face at the type of scale that we're operating Node.js is very different from our 100 instances on AWS somewhere, to run a startup site.
I did want to ask about the question. There was somebody, I think Aaron said that you can't even run 10.
Yeah, we cannot. There's an issue with how with OpenSSL and session tickets are managed. It's a whole separate conversation Fedor has been working on for a while. Looks like we're going to have to skip Node 10.
So yeah, I guess, is there like an issue in the community so that there's awareness on that? And okay, yeah, just wanted to make sure.
So that leads to the last question of how do we actually tie all of these topics together? I don't know if a weekly meeting is probably going to take a lot of time, or even if it's a monthly meeting, it'll take everybody's time and commitment. And I'd rather give more of the asynchronous type of feedback cycle a bit more try. So one of the topics we discussed is, would a mailing list of some sort, even if it's just copy-paste email addresses for now, with some basic call to action, be a good starting point? And would that be something you, as a representative of different enterprises that you're part on, actually take that on? Or is that not effective because your inboxes are as crazy as mine and you don't even have a chance to read them?
I'm a fan. I want to know when the releases are out, period. So if I have heads up that there's something pending and we're trying out, I want to get in front of that. Yeah, I'm a fan.
Yeah, same here.
Which is more painful, email or another Slack channel?
Send me an email.
100% Slack.
Slack is more painful, yeah.
Right. Great, so we'll do Slack then. Yeah, and we can do the whole agile thing, because I hear that's a thing we can refine and improve over time of how to best do these type of engagements. But I think a very good starting point is, like we immediately identified, like doing some sort of call to action early on release candidates for saying, hey, here's the major impacts. We don't need to list all the change logs, but just major impacts, things around performance, things around breaking changes. And just sending that out, and for people to opt in and providing back an answer of saying, yeah, this sounds painful. Maybe we can be involved. And then the actions from that depends on the type of answers. And then the other thing we also identified, just to wrap this up, in terms of providing data out in a continuous fashion as opposed to a call to action, any sort of tooling that makes it frictionless or simple, that provides level of information that is manually inspected and shared, at least for a start, is probably something feasible, or something, or it sounds at least feasible for teams that they can adopt and run with, which would provide us information around mostly focus on core Node API usage and statistics. We might surface more ideas and opportunities to surface more type of things, but for now, we're just talking about core API usage and running that as part of, at least for starters, build time, perhaps not runtime, because that's instrumentation. Build time might just surface, how many times do you use write async versus write in the file system modules, or how many times are you even using any of the Promisify libraries in there? Just useful data that can actually be surfaced back to the core project. I'm not aware of any such tool existing. We don't even have that ourselves. We're just tracking libraries. If anybody knows of such a tool or wants to write such a tool, that'd be cool. I might take that on as well, just for the fun of it. But that could be one of the call to actions.
Yeah, no, I definitely I wrote the original scanner that got productized into a couple of things at NodeSource for modules, for doing that kind of the NPM audit stuff.
Right.
But inside, no. Great.
Yeah.
All right.
So one of the things I'd like to share is, before we do another one of these, I'm not sure about it sounds like other people are in a very similar case where we have a lot of Node projects going across the company, a lot of different moving parts. I guess the lead time for this meeting really didn't give me an opportunity to do the due diligence of reaching out to these teams and really representing everything across Netflix and really leveling up the dialogue here. I guess if the weekly cadence kind of spooked me when you brought up weekly, monthly seems a little bit more reasonable. But I guess just giving enough time for these larger teams and larger companies to actually reach out to across their organization and bring a little bit higher level dialogue to these would be awesome.
Yeah, and I thought also be cautious of the time of the year as well. Vacations and holidays and snow might prevent a lot of people from being active, at least in extracurricular activities. So I would say at the very least, we probably should try to set a date for a monthly type of thing, but it's going to be mid-December, so we'll figure something out.
Do you want to just shoot for January at this point, Ahmed?
Yeah.
Let's just shoot for January.
Probably
late January would be good.
Yeah,
Great.
and that's why I wanted to emphasize on the asynchronous nature of doing any sort of call to action or doing any sort of action of gathering data. Even if we do not have this type of forum, we should still be able to communicate asynchronously. And provided there's a very simple ask and very simple, clear call to action, then people can opt into that. Great. Well, we're at time, so thank you all for joining us. This has been great.
We're losing
Thanks,
a room.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.